Annual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Father Hank Van. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's all rise for entrance hymn. We are gathering together unto Him. We are gathering together unto Him. Unto Him shall the gathering of the people be. We are gathering together unto Him. We are singing together unto Him. We are singing together unto Him. Unto Him shall the singing of the people be. We are singing together unto Him. We are offering together unto Him. We are offering together unto Him. Unto Him shall the offering of the people be. We are offering together unto Him.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The
Amen.
peace of the Lord be with you.
And with your
And
spirit.
as we have placed ourselves before the Lord on this memorial of Saint Anselm, Doctor of the Church, realizing that we need God's guidance at every breath we take. You were sent to heal the contrite of heart. Lord, have mercy.
Lord have
You
mercy.
came to call sinners. Christ, have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
You are seated at the right hand of the Father to intercede for us. Lord, have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life.
Amen. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to the Father. Glory to God, glory to God, glory to the Father. To
who led Bishop Saint Anselm to seek out and teach the depth of your wisdom, grant, we pray, that our faith in you may so aid our understanding, that what we believe by your command may give delight in our hearts. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen. In today's first reading, we will get to know that how believers shared their possessions.
First reading from the Acts of the Apostle, chapter 4, verses 32 to 37. Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. With great power, the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. There was a Levite, a native of Cyprus, Joseph, to whom the apostles gave the name Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He sold a field that belonged to him, then brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Let's all rise for acclamation. In today's Gospel reading, we will hear that Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews, visits Jesus.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to Nicodemus, "Do not be astonished that I said to you, you must be born from above. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." Nicodemus said to him, "How can this be?" Jesus answered, "Are you a teacher of Israel, and you do not understand these things? Very truly I tell you, we speak of what we know and testify to what we have seen, yet you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you about earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you about heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
It's kind of a beautiful conversation between John and Nicodemus, and it fits perfectly in with the Saint Anselm we celebrate today. Nicodemus, he thinks in earthly ways, and Jesus, of course, is speaking in spiritual ways, and there's this misunderstanding, and Nicodemus sure gets he sure is being told. But it is something, there's a combination between our earthly thinking and the spiritual thinking. If we live all, the spiritual is more emotional, and it's different again than philosophy. And so we have Saint Anselm, who lived in the 12th century, and he was one of the first ones to be from the scholastic schools of learning, and he brought philosophy, human reasoning, and theology together. It goes together. Faith and reason goes together. And so also in science, I hear sometimes people saying, "Oh, I don't believe, I'm a scientist," and so on. But science and faith goes together, because it is all part of the same creation, and the two, they just flow into each other. And it's good stuff to pray with. Also in science, the more further we go into science, the more mystical it becomes. But at the same time, we also have to be aware that with human reasoning only brings us so far, because there's a spiritual component. And especially in these days, as we are now about 5 or 6 weeks into the corona pandemic, I call it the corona thing, it again shows us that with human reason only brings us so far. That we also have to pray with it. Lord, what are you teaching us? Lord, what are you teaching us? And yes, we need human reasoning. Yes, we have to do research and find a cure. But at the same time, it also makes us aware how little we know. A little tiny thing, which you need an electronic microscope to see. Actually, the first time they could even see a virus was in 1931, when they had an electronic microscope. How something like that can govern our life, can teach us that just human knowledge, it only brings us so far. That teach us that we have to have faith. Teach us that we have to listen to God and give our lives to God. And so it is so important to spend time with that, and that both of them come together. That we are people who brings head and heart together. Because the rational will tell us many things, but the heart will tell us also many things. It's like someone wants to sell us a good car, and all the reasons, everything adds up, but something doesn't feel right, and we have to listen to those feelings. Also, in our first reading, we have the proto-Christian community, or they didn't call themselves Christians, they called themselves people of the way, and they start to live in community. And today, I'm a Jesuit, and religious communities, Jesuits, Benedictines, and so on, Sisters of St. Joseph, they all live in community. We bring our goods together, and out of that, we take care of one another. And again, it's really helpful, because when we live in community, so even among Jesuits, few of us are smarter than others, not all of them, I came in through the kitchen door, but someone who's, for instance, has a doctorate in astrophysics, for instance, he should not be worrying about the daily administration of a community or some works. He should spend his time on his specialty. Same with a theologian or someone who's doing medical research. And that's the beauty of coming together and living in community and bringing our goods together. And St. Anselm, he was a Benedictine monk. He got all the time to work on his thesis, on his works, and to think about these things, and to pray with it, and to write his works, because other people were taking care of his personal needs. And so it is good for us to learn from it, to be people of contemplation, to, when we listen to the news, and we hear all these things, or we listen to whatever program it is, not just to take it by whatever they tell us, not just to take it in, but to sit back, to contemplate it. What are they telling us? Does this make sense? Is there too much hype around something? What is going on? And so this time, it's a good time, and especially as we, with this coronavirus, and as it is raining, I presume at this time, that it is a time again to look back and to say, Lord, what are you teaching us? Lord, what can I learn? Lord, how can I be a better person in community? And in community, it's not just religious community, in our families. Or if I live in a nursing home, or wherever I live, how can I be more your instrument? And how can I be more trusting? Trusting that you show me the way. Science, as I said before, is really atheistic. And in my own work, so many people I see for spiritual direction, they are, say, under psychological care, which is very good. Psychiatry is very good, and some of us have to be under psychiatric care, and we need our medication. But they often miss out on the spiritual side. It is the two bringing together. And I have seen that in cases that someone is in psychological care, that after a while they don't need as much medication anymore. That there's a certain calmness, that there's a more understanding, and they even discover a vocation in their suffering. To find a vocation in their suffering. And it is so important for each one of us to look in our lives and to say, Lord, what are you teaching me through my daily struggles? What are you teaching me through my disappointments? But also, what are you teaching me through my gifts, my successes, my joys? Amen. And so let us bring our prayers before the Lord. Let us pray for all those in the Daily TV Mass community who have asked to be included in our prayer intention book during this Easter season. The hope that comes from the risen Lord, may it strengthen those in our community suffering from physical or emotional difficulties. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
We pray for all those who are struggling with addictions, that they might find healing and strength in our ever-loving, compassionate God. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
We pray for the millions of refugees locked in refugee camps, that they may, hopefully, by the guidance of the Holy Spirit, find strength in their desperate situations. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our
We
prayer.
pray for all students and their teachers who are affected by the corona pandemic. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our
And for these prayers and the prayers in the silence of our own hearts, we lift them up to you, Lord. Amen.
In bread we bring you, Lord, our bodies labor. In wine we offer you, our spirits drink. We do not ask you, Lord, who is my neighbor, but stand united now, one in belief. Oh, we have gladly done your word, your holy word, and now in answer, Lord, our gifts we bring. Our selfish hearts we through, our failing faith renew. Our lives belong to you, our God and King. The bread we offer you is blessed and broken, and it becomes for us our spirit's food. Over the cup we bring, your word is spoken. Make it your gift to us, your healing love. Take all that daily toil that's in our hearts bosom. Take all we start and spoil, each hopeful dream. The chances we have missed, the graces we resist. Lord, in the Eucharist, take and redeem.
Pray, my sisters and brothers, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands for the praise and glory of His name, forever and ever.
May the sacrifice which we gladly present on the feast day of Blessed Anselm be pleasing to you, O God, for taught by him we too give ourselves entirely to you in praise, through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit,
Lift up your hearts.
lift them up to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere, to give you thanks, Lord, Holy Father, Almighty and Eternal God, through Christ our Lord. For in the marvelous confession of your saints, you make your church fruitful with strength ever new, and offer us sure signs of your love, and that your saving mysteries may be fulfilled. The great example lends us courage, the fervent prayers sustain us in all we do. And so, Lord, with all the angels and saints, we too give you thanks as in exaltation we acclaim.
Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna,
indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread and giving you thanks, broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you. In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice, and once more giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of a new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me. The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that, partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world, and bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis our Pope, Thomas our Bishop, the Canadian bishops, the clergy, and the entire people you have called your own. Remember also our sisters and brothers who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with Blessed Joseph, our spouse, with the blessed apostles and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him, and with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever. Amen. And at the Saviour's command, and formed by divine teaching, we dare to say,
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Saviour, Jesus Christ.
For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
Lord Jesus Christ, who said to your apostles, Peace I leave you, my peace I give you. Look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
The peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your
And
spirit.
let us offer each other a sign of peace.
Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. May the body of Christ keep me safe for eternal life.
Since we cannot receive the Holy Communion, let us remember our first Holy Communion and also our best moment when we received the body and blood of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. O Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart. Since now I cannot receive him sacramentally, be so good to place him spiritually in my soul and never permit me to separate it from him. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, I need you. Come, sweet Spirit, I pray. Come in your strength and your power. Come in your own gentle grace. Come as a rest to the weary. Come as a balm to my soul. Come, Lord, and strength to my weakness. Fill me with joy evermore. Come, Holy Spirit, I need you. Come, sweet Spirit, I pray. Come with your strength and your power. Come in your own gentle grace. Come like a spring in the desert. Come to the wearied of soul. Let's say the prayer after communion of St. Thomas Aquinas. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having been pleased through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me a sinner and your unworthy servant with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss. When you will call me, I pray that you bring me a sinner to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints, to life, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say the prayer for priest of Saint Teresa of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart, where none may touch them. Keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purple with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may their souls, to whom they minister, be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
And let us pray. Through Christ the teacher, O Lord, instruct those you feed with Christ the living bread, that on the feast day of Blessed Anselm they may learn your truth and express it in works of charity. Through Christ, O Lord.
Amen.
And on behalf of the TV Mass community, we wish everyone continued a good Easter season, where we can reflect on all the gifts Christ has given us, especially the resurrection, this great gift which has been given to us and we often neglect it. The Lord be with you.
And with your
And may
spirit.
Almighty God bless you, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace, glorifying the Lord by your life.
Thanks be to God. Praise Him, praise Him in the morning, praise Him in the noontime. Praise Him, praise Him when the sun goes down. Love Him, love Him, love Him in the morning, love Him in the noontime. Love Him, love Him, love Him when the sun goes down. Trust Him, trust Him, trust Him in the morning, trust Him in the noontime. Trust Him, trust Him, trust Him when the sun goes down. Thank you, Lord, for this moment that you have given to all of us. Thank you, Lord, for the moment you have created through this Mass. Lord, we ask your help so that whatever we have with us, we can share with others to build a good community and also we can build a selfless attitude. For this we pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. We'll say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of heaven, rejoice now. Alleluia. Rejoice, for he who beareth though despair. Alleluia. He is risen, as he foretold. Alleluia. Pray for us to the Father. Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Alleluia. For the Lord has truly risen. Alleluia. Let us pray. O God, you deign to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Saint Faustina, pray for us. Saint Jose Maria Escriva, pray for us. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.